Hello there. In this video I'll be explaining how to set up a simple circuit and how to use the multimeters to measure current and to measure voltage. The power source we use is the power pack, and most of the time, if not all the time, we'll be using the positive and negative terminals, which will act like the positive and negative terminals on a battery. In setting up our circuit, it's useful to think about the direction the current is moving and think in terms of that. So I always start from the positive terminal so that the current flows out of the positive terminal, flows into the device that we want to activate, like this light bulb. So the current flows into the light bulb, then flows out of the light bulb, through the connecting lead, and back into the power pack, making a circuit, which we can turn on and change the voltage through use of the dials. Check that the voltage is one that's prescribed by your teacher and change it using the dial. Now there's also ways we can troubleshoot if the circuit doesn't appear to be working. You turn your circuit on and at first it doesn't appear to be working. The first thing you should check is the actual component itself. Turn the power pack off. Make sure in particular that light bulbs are screwed in all the way, just to make sure they're working. If it is screwed in and isn't working, it's possible the light is blown. Ways to check this would be by inspection, if you know how to do that. If not, easiest way is to pull up a second one, connect that one up. If the second one works, it's most likely that this is blown and you should tell your teacher to see if you can get a second globe. If when you turn the power pack on absolutely nothing happens and this light doesn't turn on, check your mains power to see if that's switched on. If it is switched on, it's most likely that the power pack is broken. Approach your teacher and see if you can get a secondary one. And if it works, then that's the problem and the power pack needs to be replaced. We'll spend the next few minutes talking about the multimeter and how we can use it to measure current and voltage. We'll first off talk about voltage. Reminder, voltage gives us an indication of how much energy is being used between 2 points in a circuit. So it can tell us how much energy is being used between these two terminals, either side of the globe, effectively telling us how much energy is being used by the globe when it's turned on. To measure voltage, it's often easiest to use the probes, although connecting leads will work just fine. If you are using the probes, it's good to keep in mind that they're really sharp and should be treated as such, and should be managed and handled with care. Now, if we're using the multimeter to measure voltage, the two terminals we need to use are the middle one and the bottom one. The bottom one says COM, and the middle one has a tiny V there for measuring voltage. Here I'm going to connect my red probe to the central terminal, and I'm going to connect my black probe to the bottom terminal. Doesn't matter too much which way around they go, but this is a bit more conventional, so I'll do it this way. Now, to measure the voltage across our globe, we want our circuit set up just as it was before, with current going from the power pack into the globe, out of the globe, and then back into the power pack at the other terminal. And then we want our two probes placed into these sockets, or if you're using connecting leads instead, just place the connecting leads into those sockets. Then turn the power pack on. Once again, if the globe hasn't turned on, troubleshoot as we've talked about before. To get your power pack to measure voltage, we want to use a particular setting. You'll notice over here in this section, we have a V there representing volts. The setting I want you to use will be where it says 20. So we're using just a regular measure of voltage and not in millivolts or microvolts or something crazy like that. So we want to rotate the dial such that it's pointing towards, there we go, it's pointing towards the 20, and then it should start displaying the voltage. Now, you just need to gently leave the probes or the leads in there. You don't need to push them in with any force. If you start doing that, the multimeter starts getting confused. So you just need to gently leave them settling in there. You might find that it occasionally flickers between different values. That's not cause for alarm. It's very common. But that's displayed our voltage there. We'll get different voltages depending on different powers coming out from our power pack as well. A good indication that your voltage is being displayed correctly is that as long as you have one device connected, like this light bulb, this voltage should be within about 1 or 2 volts of what's displayed on the power pack, and then it's functioning correctly. If your voltage isn't displaying correctly, the first thing you should do is turn the circuit off. Check that your connections are correct. Check that these are in the Check that the leads are in the appropriate sockets, which should be the middle one and the bottom one, and check that this dial is correctly pointing to the 20 volt setting. If you have a functioning light bulb and you try and measure the voltage and absolutely nothing displays on the screen, this means that the multimeter has a flat battery and needs to be replaced. Notify your teacher and collect a fresh one. Okay, now we'll talk about how we can use our multimeter to measure current instead. Now remember, current is telling us how fast the charge is flowing through the circuit. So to be able to effectively measure current, we'll need the current to pass through the multimeter. So it's useful to think about the multimeter as being part of the circuit when we're measuring current, so that it needs to flow through it so that it can be measured. To measure current, our multimeter is going to be part of the circuit. For that reason, we need to use the leads in order to do this, not the probes. Okay, the 2 sockets that we need to use for the current will be the top one and the bottom one. Notice how there's a tiny 10A, A for amps, which is what we measure current in, so that goes to the top, and we also use the bottom one as well to measure current. To connect the multimeter to the circuit to measure current, it's useful to dismantle it in order to explain it at least the first time. So I'm just going to take all the leads away, so that we've got the 2 devices that we're connecting. And once again, we're connecting up a circuit, so it's useful to think about where does the current need to flow. So the current is going to start at the positive terminal. This time it's going to flow into the multimeter so that it can measure current. I'm going to place it into the top socket. It needs to flow out of the multimeter, so I'll use a second lead coming from the bottom socket so that it's flowing out this way. It then needs to flow into the light bulb and then out of the light bulb and return back to the power pack. Now, as you do this, you might notice that some of the colours of the leads and the colours of the terminals might not match up. That's nothing to really be worried about. The colours are really just for preference and to help with some circuits, but it doesn't matter too much, so don't worry about that overly much. The dial setting on the multimeter used to measure current is the red one that says 10A for 10 amps. So rotate the dial to that setting, so we're doing 10 amps. Take particular notice of the way the arrow points, because some students get these mixed up and they could have the dial turn completely around the opposite way. So take note of where the arrow is. It should be pointing at the red 10A, and make sure you're using the top and bottom connections. When it functions to measure current, it can be particularly sensitive, and if it's not connected correctly, and if these aren't connected correctly and the setting isn't correct, you might blow the fuse inside the ammeter and break it. So with everything correct, we can turn it on. We can observe the current that's flowing. The type of currents that you get will usually be quite small, even if you have this turned up to 12 volts. So you're noticing 0.09 amps there. That's very common to see. You won't get currents that are very big, at least displayed on the ammeter. So if this doesn't appear to be working, there's a few things you can do to check. The first thing to check is if the circuit is connected correctly. A good way to check if your circuit is connected correctly, if it's forming a circuit, so check to see that it's flowing out of the power pack into your multimeter, into your globe, and then back to the power pack, forming a nice circuit. If you've got more connections than this, then something's probably wrong and you need to recheck and evaluate what you're doing. It may be that you get an issue where your power pack isn't even turned on and your multimeter is displaying a current. If this is happening, that means there's a faulty fuse inside and this probably needs to be replaced with a new one. Go and tell your teacher and see if we can get a fresh multimeter to measure current with. And that concludes how we use multimeters to measure current and voltage. So I hope this has been helpful. Like always, if you're working with a circuit and you're not sure what to do, make sure you communicate with your teacher rather than experimenting to try different things to make it work. Don't force it. Ask your teacher, make sure we get things working correctly, otherwise we'll end up breaking parts and having to replace them. Thank you very much.